I'm assu- I'm assuming he will just jump in and join us at some point.
Well, I've got 7. I assume people will join. I will admit as we go. For those of you who don't know, if you saw the Orioles release their schedule for 2022 for next year. So it is official. The dates match up with the rescheduled SABR 50 dates. So, August, 17th to the 21st. The Orioles will have a home series with Boston. So, which makes the ticket prices go up a little higher for a SABR game. But we're locked in now, pending the pandemic doesn't rear its ugly head. Hopefully all you guys got the Baltimore chop was sent out today. Should have gotten a message attaching it through the SABR tool, if you remember, or coming from our Gmail account. So enjoy that. They did a great job. I still have yet to read the whole thing. And I can't think of any other news articles to mention. We do still have the minor league game in Scranton, which is actually a month away from today, September 4th. Buffalo, I believe, is playing Scranton. It's a doubleheader. So if you're interested and want to know more, let me know. And our SABR chapter game at Camden Yards will be September 25th against the Texas Rangers, which is a Saturday. So expect some info on that too. We're trying to line up speakers as we speak. So tonight we have Shawn Herne, who is currently the executive director of the Babe Ruth Birthplace. Previously, 2004 to, let me see if I get this right, 2015, he was the chief curator for the Birthplace Foundation, which then included sports legends and the actual Babe Ruth Museum. He left for then greener pastures to Annapolis, and then returned a year or so later as Mike Gibbons stepped down and retired. Shawn took over as the executive director. So he's been has a lot of years experience in the sports world. He can tell you about his pedigree and background. And obviously we as a chapter are grateful for the Birthplace's acceptance of us and embracing us since our days of infancy. And we've met there and been partners with them now going on 6 years, I guess it is. So, and they're going to be very involved with SABR 50 coming up next year, which will benefit them, the SABR members across the country, and give them more recognition than currently they receive from baseball fans, hopefully. So I will let Shawn do his thing. If you guys have questions, put them in the chat or hold them to the end.
Thanks, Peter. First of all, I don't think it was us accepting you. It was a marriage that seemed to make complete and total sense, and still does. Any time that we can promote Babe Ruth and we can promote baseball, we can promote Orioles history, we want to do that. I'm going to apologize. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to apologize. I'm hard of hearing, in deaf in one ear, so it makes it hard for me when I do these because I can't necessarily hear back. So I'm wearing the headset, not because I want to look like an air traffic controller or anything, but it's really the best way for me to actually do one of these. And thank you, Peter, for inviting me and everybody. And we can make this a little loosey-goosey as we go along. We don't have to hold questions till the end. Peter asked me to do this a little while ago, he and Bruce, to talk about not just the state of the Babe Ruth Museum, but sort of the state of the museum industry in general. And recently I became president of the Greater Baltimore History Alliance. And if you've not heard of the History Alliance, it is a consortium of 40 of the museums in Baltimore and Greater Baltimore, including the Glenn L. Martin Aviation Museum, the Fire Museum up in Towson, and others. So I've been learning pretty quickly the state that everybody is in, and it's a tough one for sure. When the Great Depression hit back in 1928, and I'm going to sound like an old historian now, when the Great Depression hit back in 1928, everyone thought it was going to be done in a month or two. And it went on for 10 years. And, a year ago, back in February, we thought COVID was going to last a couple weeks. We were all going to go home, and then we were going to be reunited with family and plan everything again by Easter. And here we are a year and a half later, and we don't know if we're at the tail end of this thing or if we're in the middle of this thing. So it has certainly challenged a lot of our institutions, not just museums, but of course, as we know every day, our schools and everything else. Let me tell you a little bit about the industry, and then I'll tell you about what we're doing at the museum to kind of not only deal with COVID, but use it as an opportunity to move forward. So, what I tell everybody is that, if you look back into the 1980s at bookstores, or the 1970s, bookstores were these local corner mom and pop shops where you went and got books. And then Walden Books came along and built bookstores in the mall, and we loved those. But then Borders and Barnes and Noble came along, and that was bigger, it was better. And then Amazon came along and changed everything. And same thing with grocery stores. The corner, you get our groceries from the corner grocer, and then grocery stores came along, and then supermarkets came along, and then Wegmans came along, and now we're dealing with Instacart. And same is true with just about every business now. Libraries, if you haven't been to a public library, it's not the old library that we knew, that you were immediately welcomed with books and a gray-haired librarian who shushed you as you walked in. They're very, very different places. And I think the museum industry, in some ways, has shielded ourselves from those changes, but COVID is certainly going to make us do things differently if we're going to survive. And Bruce just came in also with a headset, so I feel better about myself already. Hi, Bruce. We are at a juncture, I think, especially in the museum industry right now, where some of us are going to survive this pandemic and some of us are not going to. The American Alliance of Museum, which is like the umbrella organization for all museums, it kind of sets the standards for us, estimated when the pandemic began that 30% of museums wouldn't survive. Now, fortunately, PPP, EIDL, and all the other alphabet soup programs that have come about have saved a certain number. But many of my colleagues in the museum industry are concerned that the year coming is going to be worse than the year that we just had, because there isn't going to be all of those relief programs the second time around. And we're going to have to try to figure out how to make things work. So let me give you a quick overview about the kind of the business side of museums, because we like to visit museums. We are historians. So I know when most of us, if you're like me, you go on vacation, the first thing you do is you kind of check out what some of the local sites are to see. But we're becoming a little bit of an anomaly these days. But museums right now in the United States, pre-COVID, which is going to be interesting. I think our language is going to change. Pre it's going to be PC, or BC is going to be before COVID, and then PC is going to be post-COVID. At least I hope. But BC, before COVID, 850 million visitors attended museums in the United States annually. 850 million. Generated over $50 billion in revenue in all 50 states. And that is direct revenue from admissions and store sales and things like that, but also through salaries and contractors and suppliers with indirect revenue. In Maryland, it was about 955 million annually generated by all of the museums in the state. In terms of jobs, 372,000 people are actually employed by a museum in the United States. And there's another 3 million volunteers, many of you might fall under those categories. Some of you are volunteers with Babe Ruth. Some of you I know are volunteers at other institutions, but there's 3 million people who volunteer in museums annually. In the state of Maryland, that's about just shy of 10,000 people who are employed in all of the museums. So it makes up a pretty big chunk of revenue, both nationally and statewide. And what museums have always been bad at doing is kind of telling people that, not only are we important in terms of preserving the history and culture of our country and our states, but we're actually economic revenue generators. And during COVID, I was certainly arguing to Visit Baltimore that once you close down the convention center and once you close down the arena, museums are the only thing you've got going for you. And some of us stayed open, some of us did not. But in terms of attracting folks to Baltimore and attracting people to Maryland, it's many of our historic attractions, in addition to our ballparks and arenas, that we're keeping things going. So give you some idea of the Babe Ruth Museum. Our best year in the past 10 was 2018. We had just shy of 25,000 visitors during that time. Last year, we had 2,668 visitors. So 25,000 down to 2,600. This year, we've had 6,000, as of yesterday, 6,038. And we're halfway through the calendar year. So I'll be happy if we can get somewhere close to 12,000. That'll be 50% of what we would normally do in a good year. But a lot of our admissions is also contingent on what the Orioles do. And we know that every year since 2014, the Orioles attendance has declined. I think in 2016, it was 2.1 million, just shy of 2.2 million. Then 2017, it was 2 million flat. 2018, 1.5. 2019, 1.3. And this year, we're at 459,000. So we're probably not even going to break 1 million this year for Orioles attendance. So our attendance at the museum is obviously connected and directly linked to the Orioles attendance. We have been struggling this year with getting Marylanders to come visit us. We ask everyone who comes through the door where they're from. And I can tell you 3 days ago, Japan beat Maryland in terms of how many people visited the museum that day. We had 2 people from the state of Maryland. We had 5 from Japan. And I think we had maybe 45 for the day. I'm being told by a lot of the other museums in town that they're facing the same thing. I saw last night the aquarium announced that their attendance is back to what it was before. I don't think any of us believe that. If you've been to the Inner Harbor in the past 2 years, you know that there's no businesses there. There's no tourists there. People aren't coming downtown. And when they do come downtown, if they're coming down for a baseball game, they're parking in the lots at the ballpark and they're going directly inside. They're not hanging around. They're not visiting businesses in the harbor and making a day of it. So certainly the environment has changed a lot for us. So the Babe Ruth Museum, we shut down for a short period of time during COVID, came back last June. Like all institutions, we developed a reopening plan where people were kept socially distanced from each other, masks, all of that fun stuff. And we developed a way of greeting people outside so that we could send people in a few at a time, and did the arrows on the floor of a direct path and everything that everybody else did. And basically nobody came. So it has been an interesting time. And for us, it's important because just shy of 50% of our operating revenue comes from admissions and store sales. Our annual budget before COVID, BC, was about $425,000 a year, with about 212,000 coming from admissions and retail. The other half of that comes from donations, it comes from grants, it comes from memberships, it comes from begging, borrowing. I haven't resorted to stealing, but the way the government was throwing money around, maybe you could call that stealing. But special events were a big part of that. So if you've been to the birthday bash, if you've been to our opening day party, if you've been to any of our evening with programs, those are the events that make up the rest of the operating budget. So when COVID hit, the first thing we had to do was cut all expenses, and we managed to cut nearly $100,000 out of the budget right off the top. And the day that I announced that we were closing, we were one of the last museums to close. We held out. And the day we closed, it was a Sunday. And I was waiting for the aquarium to decide what they were going to do. A lot of the other places were already shutting down. I thought if the aquarium stuck it out, B&O Railroad Museum stuck it out, we would try to stick it out. And when they finally pulled the plug, I thought, okay, we got to do it too. So I called an emergency meeting of our board executive committee the next day. And one of our board members called me 10 minutes before the meeting. And she said, I know what the meeting's about. I know what we're going to talk about. Before we do, what is your payroll? And I told her, I said, our payroll is about $25,000 a month with benefits and everything. And she said, okay, my husband and I are going to write you a check for $25,000. Don't lay anybody off until we can figure this out. And quite honestly, that saved our butt. Being a baseball museum, we are completely dependent on the baseball season. And opening day hadn't happened yet. So we were coming out of the winter. I jokingly tell everybody we're squirrels. We spend the summer gathering nuts to get through the winter. And that winter had been particularly hard. So we were carrying a lot of debt going into opening day of the baseball season. So if I didn't have an opening day, it was looking pretty grim. But this board member who could financially pull it off wrote a check for $25,000 that got us to the first PPP program, got us a payroll protection program, got us to the first emergency economic, it's EIDL, but I don't understand, economic injury loan program. It got us to that. And from then on, we just kept trying to pull the pieces together. We did an emergency appeal. Many of you contributed to that emergency appeal last May. That brought in another $11,000. And then I worked with a lot of the other museum directors to really get on the back of the mayor, city council, and Visit Baltimore. And I told them the exact same thing I just told you, 30% of the museums are going to fail. And of course, politicians get a little nervous when you start saying things like that. And I said, 30% are going to fail. Which ones are you going to let go? And of course, they immediately, oh, we're not going to let any of them go. And I said, well, then what are you going to do about it? And we started to see, although not immediate funding from City Hall, we started to see the mayor recognize that museums and attractions were an important piece in this. The governor's office began to do that. And the governor's office eventually, through the work of a lot of people, put some of the tourism money up to bolster some of the nonprofits. And we were one of those, a lot of them. I feel bad for institutions like the aquarium or the zoo because they have living collections. You can't, a baseball museum, we could scale things back, but organizations that had living collections, animals, fish and sharks and dolphins, they still have to be fed. They still have to be cared for. They still need to keep the veterinarians on staff, and you still have to provide food and medicine and everything. So their operating expenses were pretty much, hard set, whereas we could make changes. I'm happy to say our impact was, in terms of reducing staff, was pretty minimal. We anticipated that it wasn't going to go on as long as it has. But through a series of grants, as I just mentioned, we took out a loan. We were able to generate over $400,000 in COVID relief. Now, $150,000 of that is a loan that we took out. So I can tell you, this is no secret, but we have $200,000 sitting in the bank right now. $150,000 of that is still a loan. But as I told you, we're squirrels. That $200,000 has got to last me till opening day of next year. So it's a big challenge. As I also said, I'm not sure if we are at the end of this and we're seeing COVID's last hurrah, or are we just in the middle of it? I hope we're close to the end of it. But the news scares me every night, as I'm sure it makes all of you nervous. That numbers are climbing again. But I'm hoping that we're all a little bit better prepared. What the museum did, well, I'll say this too. I think the large institutions are going to do all right. They have a lot more resources to draw from. Some of them have endowments, meaning that they had investments, they had large cash deposits that they live off. Um, Smaller institutions, especially the volunteer-based institutions, I think will be okay because they don't have a large overhead. But I think institutions like the Babe Ruth Museum, Baltimore Museum of Industry, the Star Spangled Banner Flag House, even the Science Center, those that are really dependent on admissions, we're going to continue to have a rough go of it. We got to cut back our operating expenses more, consolidate where we can, and try to find new ways to interface with our audience. Now, the good news for me is I consider that an opportunity. The glass is not half empty, the glass is half full. It's forced us to be creative. And one of the first things, and if you followed us on our YouTube channel, you may remember we started doing these little videos. And it was tough because we were only allowing one person in the museum at a time at that point. But we would put our phone on a tripod and hit record, and we'd make these little videos down in the collection storage room, and we'd hold up stuff and say, my favorite thing is this. And we were trying to generate content for our audience, for people who were interested in the museum, so that something was still coming from the museum. And we actually learned a lot about ourselves, and we actually learned a lot from the reactions that we got from people that they like this kind of stuff. And so, we were forced to find new ways. We were forced to think outside the box. I'm really concerned that some of the other museums are not going to think outside the box, and that they're going to perish. So what we're doing now, the current issues, I think, in the museum industry, of course, is sustainability. We got to make sure that we're here moving forward, not just getting through COVID, but what is the landscape going to look like once we're through this? Because I don't think any of us believe we're going to go back to the way things used to be. It's going to be a different landscape moving forward. It certainly looks like that in terms of our school systems. Our schools are going to do virtual learning isn't going to go away. It's going to take on a different role, and hopefully it gets better. But I don't think we're going to go back. So we have to find new ways of doing things. I think one of the other challenges that we have been facing, and we've been facing this for a long time, is that we now have a generation that have never been to museums. And I'm looking around at the faces that I can see on this SABR meeting. So you're all similar to me, and your probably first exposure to a museum was probably your 5th grade field trip. Loaded up in the school buses, and we were excited we were going somewhere, and we didn't know where we were going, but across the country in every state, that was a pretty standard thing that the 5th graders went and visited a local museum. That's not happening anymore, and that started to go away after Maryland had the sniper. You remember the sniper just before 9/11? The guy who was shooting, the 2 guys that were shooting people out of a trunk of a car. School stopped doing field trips after that. They never resumed them to the same numbers prior to that. Then 9/11 came and they stopped again. And I'm just worried now because transportation costs for schools is staggering. Baltimore County Schools told me that it costs them $700 per bus per trip. And that doesn't include admission to any of the attractions. That's just paying the school bus driver and taking out the extra insurance. They need to take out extra insurance when it's not one of their regular runs, and fuel costs. It's $700. So if you take 3 buses to the aquarium, it's $2,100 just in transportation costs. And that's getting to be too much. Debbie Phelps, you may recognize the name. She's the mother of Michael Phelps, the Olympian. She's also executive director of the Baltimore County Public School Foundation. And she and I were talking the other day, and she believes the same thing. She said, one of the things that hasn't hit the news is that in May, Baltimore County lost 30 principals to retirement and attrition. Some of them just outright quit. They can promote vice principals to principals positions, but they don't have enough people to replace the vice principals because they don't have enough teachers right now. And she said, on top of all of that, what is not really being discussed is that they don't have enough school bus drivers or crossing guards. Because when the school bus drivers all got laid off, if they had a commercial driver's license, they went to work for Amazon, they went to work for UPS, they went to work for FedEx. And some of them are not coming back. So there's a serious shortage of school bus drivers going into this next school year. And I know that sounds like that's a weird thing, but those are the things that museums are trying to figure out right now. You know, if we're not going to get kids to come to our doors, if we're not going to get senior centers to load up in their vans and come down and see us, how are we going to reach them? And on top of all of that mess, I don't know if you've watched the news lately, but all the news about Baltimore is pretty bad. I call it the WBAL, WJZ, Fox 45 bubble. It's bad, bad, bad all the time. And we never have any positive news to counter it. And I know a lot of people who say, there's no chance I'm coming downtown. I won't go to a restaurant now in Little Italy. I'll stay out here in the county. And as I said earlier, if they're going to come to an Orioles game, they're going to park in the lot at Oriole Park, and they're going to get in and get out as soon as the game is over. And I don't have an answer for that one. We're all talking about it. We're all worried about it in the museum business. We're seeing our demographic getting older. We're no longer seeing people wanting to bring their kids to museums. What we hear more often now is that they want to bring their dad and mom to a museum. Which is still fine because I'm hoping they bring their kids too. But we're seeing a whole demographic change in who the audience is. So what have we done at Babe Ruth? And I'll now just focus on Babe Ruth. As I said, we started those little YouTube videos. Those YouTube videos, by the way, were started by a 17-year-old high school senior for an internship. He started out the year before working on a few for us. I interviewed the kid, fine young man. And I said to him, I said, well, do you know how to use YouTube? And he looked at me like I was a moron, because he was born using YouTube, whereas it's a whole new platform for me. And he's the one that created the format of our little videos, Curator's Corner and My Favorite Things. And you can go back on our YouTube channel and look at some of them. We loved them. We thought they were so incredible when we first did them. Now we're looking at them going, ooh, they're a little rough. There's not a lot of polish there. But certainly during COVID, we were happy to do anything. And we were propping up laptops on cardboard boxes to try to record some of these things. And by the way, my laptop right now is propped up on a cardboard box. So if you think I've got any better at it, I certainly haven't. But we have progressed. We have a company now that's working with us. Our new programs are called How About That? You probably have seen the shift that we've done. We're now trying to bring up more outside folks in to do some of these programs for us. Bill Stetka did one a couple weeks ago. And I know that we got Johnny Unitas Jr. coming in next week. He's going to film 2 about his dad, one on the 1958 Colts championship game, and then also about his dad and his bowling lanes. Yeah, Sniper was summer of 2002. Yeah, that was quite a while back. Feels like yesterday. But we're trying to bring in different faces so that you're not just seeing myself or Mike Gibbons or Katie Dick doing this, because I'm sure you all love to see us, but you would rather see folks that are celebrities in our town. So we're trying to do more of that. Our birthday bash program. Some of you have come to Birthday Bash over the years. We went virtual this year with Birthday Bash. And what we did is we tried to follow what I call the TV and radio model. Because during COVID, people that got live content off the internet, Zoom, things like this, expected it to be free. And once that precedent was set, it's really hard now to say you want to charge people for access to some of that. So what we did is we did a hybrid. Um, and we had one price point if you wanted to ask the celebrities questions, but if you wanted to watch the programming and participate with a question here and there in the chat room, that was a different price point. A lot of it was free, and that worked for us. Birthday Bash over the past few years has not generated a lot of money. I think it generated $6,000 in 2019. It generated $18,000 for us this past year doing virtual. So it certainly has indicated that we've got some possibility. We did a bunch of programs that we called live, which was pretty cool, and we're going to continue with that type of programming. I think also though moving forward we're trying to develop what we'll call a hybrid program, so that we might have a celebrity in the theater at their birthplace and have a live studio audience, a number of people who are in person, and then the rest that want to stream it at home will be able to stream it. Now, I talk about these things like I know what it means. I have than myself to interpret it for me, but I'm getting a little bit better. I grew up in the 70s. And when I grew up, there was a TV show called Zoom. So when everyone told me a year ago that they were switching over to Zoom, I thought, that old TV show is still around? I had no idea what they were talking about. And I don't think anyone else in this room knew what a Zoom was a year and a half ago. And here we all are, um, talking to each other and getting used to it. And I've even got my parents managed to get on it every now and again. So I guess it's not all bad. But I digress. Coming back, the other thing we're talking about doing, we're not talking about it, we're going to do it, is we're going to develop a virtual classroom. If kids can't get into a bus and come down to the museum, then we have to go to their classroom. And same thing, classrooms today don't look anything like they did when we were students. They're very different dynamic learning environments. The chalkboard has been replaced by a screen or a whiteboard. And we've done a couple of pilot programs already where we've actually visited classrooms in Owings Mills for some 7th graders. We did a session on the Roaring 20s for them, talked about Babe Ruth, we talked about the International League Orioles, and we talked about the Baltimore Black Sox. And that allows us to do as we're doing right now, but to talk with students, be able to hold up artifacts, be able to share with things with them, in hopes that we can get it, one, sponsored, so that there is some revenue, but two, that those kids are then interested enough that the next time they do come to a ball game, they've convinced their mom and dad to come by the museum. But I think that's the way learning is going to be, certainly in the short term. Again, Baltimore County is telling me that they're not expecting to resume field trips to any location for 3 years. So for institutions that are dependent on school trips, we've got to do something else or perish. And as I said before, I don't think this is going to stop. I don't think we're going to go back to when COVID is all behind us. Kids are going to load up in buses and come down. I think hybrid learning, virtual learning is here to stay. And we just got to figure out how we're going to be a part of that. Then the last thing that I think we're gonna work on doing is a virtual studio. And I really love the idea of the virtual studio because it means we could have a celebrity in-house. Snow days are definitely gone forever. So sad is that. But the virtual studio, we could have somebody, a former Oriole player interview them on site, but also use that interview, if it's well crafted, so that it could then be used as educational programs. So the pilot program that we're working on right now, we have some materials from the Negro Leagues. Former owner of the Baltimore Baltimore Elite Giants. We have interviews with him that were done, audio interviews. We have some audio interviews that were done with Bert Simmons and some of the other Negro League players. That's primary source material. If we can combine that with materials that SABR people have written as secondary source material. We can talk about how sports played a critical role in the integration of America. And now we have a whole sports unit that schools can use. And the kids can listen to the interviews, the primary source materials. We'll add photographs. If we have video, we'll add video. We've now got a whole learning unit that we didn't have before. So I'm excited about it. I know this is Shawn excited. I'm excited about it because I think it gives us a great opportunity to reach new audiences. And it also gives us a great opportunity to reach audiences, not just school kids, but other folks like other SABR members. It doesn't have to just be SABR Babe Ruth chapter. It could be any SABR chapter in the United States. And I think that's exciting to me. And it allows us to collaborate more with other baseball museums, the Hall of Fame, the Cincinnati Reds Museum, on and on and on, Yogi Berra, and do some joint program that we couldn't have done before. And for me, bringing new people in, getting more people exposed to what we do helps us all in the long run. So the last piece, because I know you're all interested in asking, is where are we with sports legends? Well, I can tell you 100% honestly that I am grateful that we did not reopen Sports Legends in the past 3 years, because we would have been closing it down again in the middle of a pandemic. So in some ways, the timing was not right to open a Sports Legends. That doesn't mean we can't do more Sports Legends related programming. If you've watched us lately, we're getting back to some of those roots. We are the official Orioles museum. We are getting a lot more cooperation from the Orioles organization. We're doing more for them as well. We're trying to do the same thing with the Colts alumni and some of the Ravens alumni, so that even though we don't have a brick and mortar Sports Legends at the moment, we can still do some of the programming that we used to do. That doesn't mean I don't want to build a bricks and mortar. I want as much of that stuff out on display where people can enjoy it and people can learn about our history as soon as possible. But Baltimore has got to get through COVID, but it's also got to get through this crime problem it's got. The crime problem is one of the biggest challenges that we face, and the perception that goes along with it. Whether Baltimore or parts of Baltimore are safe or not, the perception now by people is that it's not safe. And I've said, I don't have problems attracting people from New York or New Jersey or Virginia. I have problems attracting people from Towson, Westminster, Bel Air, Glen Burnie. It's at WBAL Fox 45. And it's not all their fault either. We got a real problem, and we've got to figure out some solutions and how to address some of this. So that's sort of where we are in a nutshell. Certainly open up to questions and see what everyone thinks and has to say.
I was interested in your comment about I had a question ready about whether the situation with the downtown area is perception or reality, but you just indicated there is a reality to it as far as the crime problem. But I also wanted to ask, you mentioned the attendance distribution. You've mentioned that a couple of times about the difficulty in drawing people from the state of Maryland. By the way, I live in North Carolina, but I have been to the museum several times over the past few years and enjoyed it greatly.
Appreciate that.
But is that a problem that has arisen recently, or like years ago? Did you have trouble attracting Marylanders?
No, we've never had problems attracting Marylanders until the past couple years. And perception is reality. Because if people perceive a space to be not safe, whether it's safe or not, if people perceive that, then that's the reality that we're dealing with. And I think the perception is that we're not safe. We have not recovered from the riots, and we've not had the type of leadership that has pointed in any direction. The Inner Harbor is empty. If you go down there, and my colleagues at the aquarium and the science center and historic ships would be screaming at me right now if they heard me saying that, because it's obviously not empty of those attractions, but there are very few restaurants left. There are small businesses are gone. The downtown, everything has moved over to Harbor East. The development has moved that way. The Inner Harbor pavilions are in bankruptcy, and the city has been trying to wrestle ownership of them away from the company that bought them out of New Jersey that went bankrupt. The owners are not local in any way, shape, or form, and they just, they have killed the downtown. But the downtown problems are all of our problems. Parking is outrageously expensive. So it's hard to argue for somebody that they need to come downtown when there's no businesses or shops to come to. There's very few restaurants to come, and then you're going to spend $28 to park in a garage. And you may hear this in my voice because I've been hammering this to the city council members that will listen to me and anyone else that will listen to me, that, the downtown issue is a major one. For years, the Inner Harbor was a model for other cities to follow, to develop. This was how you did it. This is how you created a beautiful first-class, world-class attraction. And it wasn't all that long ago. And now it's a ghost town. And we have got to figure that out, and we've got to figure it out soon. Now, honestly, putting a winning team on the field, the Orioles know this. I haven't had to tell them that. They're pretty clear that, putting a winning team on the field will certainly help. And the somewhat change in ownership, I'm not saying ownership, but leadership at the Orioles has certainly helped. The sons of Peter Angelos have a very different view. They have a bigger view in terms of the role that they should play in the city. They have joined the Visit Baltimore, and they have joined the downtown partnership, and they're getting involved to try to make things better. But it's been many years of neglect. So it's going to take a while, but certainly a winning team will help bring some people back and make all of us a little bit happier too.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
yes, you did.
I tend to go on a little bit.
No, yes, you certainly did. Yes.
Anybody else have questions? Feel free to unmute and ask.
But yeah,
I'd like to ask about, are there other museums across the country or even anywhere in the world whose basic reason for existence is an individual, as ours is?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. A lot of them. We belong to an organization called ISHA, the International Sports Heritage Association. It's 148 sports museums and halls of fame around the world. And there's a whole bunch of, they tend to be more around hockey when it's an individual. But they tend to be smaller community-based museums, but there's a bunch of them. And the ISHA members, we try to get together as best we can when we can, and do even things like this where we can exchange ideas, share ideas on education, and see if there's collaboration. The biggest challenge that we have with collaboration is that with baseball, with football, with college sports, there's a bigger organization, meaning Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NCAA. And so we've tried to collaborate with some of the other sports museums, but even to get a current player on, it counts against the team's number of appearances they're allowed through the collective bargaining agreement. So I'll give you an example. If I go to Trey Mancini, and Trey's a great one because he does do stuff with us. If I go to Trey Mancini and say, hey, Trey, the museum would love if you did X, Y, and Z, that doesn't account against the Orioles because that's the Babe Ruth Museum approaching Trey Mancini directly or his agent. If I go to the Orioles and ask that, it counts against the Orioles and the number of appearances they're allowed through the collective bargaining agreement. So they don't like to do them because they want to hold them out for their sponsors. They want to hold out for the people who are paying big bucks. So if you've noticed in recent years with us is that we've had to shift to a lot more of the alumni who are not under those obligations, who are not under those contracts. And quite frankly, for us, I call it the age of the agent. Any of the players that we deal with, the alumni that don't have agents, are 100% easier to work with than those that have agents. Their agents are doing their job. They're the gatekeepers. They're supposed to, keep the athlete or the alum, the Hall of Famer, whatever, a certain amount of distance away from people like us who are asking for free things. And instead, they're supposed to find ways to generate money for them. But the Brooks Robinsons, the Jim Palmers, the Boog Powells, the Lenny Moores, the Tom Maddies of the world, we can pick up the phone and call those guys and have a conversation. Now, their agents tend to be their wives, and I'm not saying that with any sarcasm, but it is quite true. They are the gatekeepers as well, and we've learned that along the way. But when you're talking now, the Cal Ripken generation up, Cal, Eddie Murray, folks like that, you're still dealing with an agent. With Cal, you're dealing with John Maroon. With Eddie Murray, you're dealing with Diane Hawk, and they're still the gatekeepers. So, and now today, the young bucks, they want to be paid $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 for an appearance. I have to sell a lot of tickets to break even to do that. There's always exceptions. Brian Roberts was a great exception. Trey Mancini is a great exception. They still see the value of doing stuff in the community, but I also think that's a reflection of their own personal values, as opposed to seeing a financial benefit. I guess to answer your question, yes, there's other museums just like us.
Right. No, it's very interesting, but you raised an issue that makes me think about when we attempt to get people like you've described, and maybe a little lesser known people, that we have a hard time. We work with Bill Stetka very closely, and we have several events a year, both we and the Washington, D.C. chapter. And I didn't realize that having a player appear that we get through Bill might have an effect on the organization. We've only ever paid once.
Yeah, if they're a current player. If they're a current player under contract. The ones that Bill gets, Al Bunbury, Tippy Martinez, those folks, they're not under a contract, so there's nothing with the CBA. But a current player, is going to be under the players agreement.
Okay, so this will affect us next year at the convention.
Yeah, to get a current player. And I'm going to tell you, so it's going to be a double-edged sword for SABR, because the good news is the Orioles are playing Boston, which should be a great game. Got to make sure that the Orioles will lock in a certain number of tickets, and so that you don't get sold out right from the beginning. But two, they're not likely to release many players to do anything SABR related if they're playing the Red Sox.
Maybe we'll get Jerry Remy, maybe.
Well, and unfortunately, that's the double-edged sword. What they're more willing, in our experience, to do is line up their media people. So they're quick to allow appearances from their broadcasters or their play-by-play folks. Hopefully, we got some good ones then. But they're more willing. But Jennifer Grandal is going to be the person you're going to deal with on that level. Bill's not going to be able to help you. It's going to go up to Jennifer at least, if not one of the Angelos boys. So, I mean, the good news about, as I said, the change in leadership is that at least now they respond. Under the previous leadership, there used to be a running joke at the warehouse, and I don't think I'm talking out of turn here. But there used to be a saying, if the museum asked the Orioles for something and they said they had to run it up the flagpole, things went up the flagpole, things never came back down the flagpole. It was almost telling you that if it has to go up the flagpole, don't hold your breath. That has changed. And as I indicated, the Angelos boys are much more involved and I think see the bigger picture of it. So you might be able to make a pitch to them now to see the value of having SABR 50 in Baltimore. I don't know them, so I'm guessing, but everything, my interaction with the Orioles has improved substantially since they've gotten involved.
Yes, I'm having, I don't know if others are, and I'm not the biggest light bulb in the room here, but I'm having a little difficulty understanding why the collective bargaining agreement, who wanted that in there? Was it the owners or the players? Because it seems it would not be a disincentive to the organization. I would think if the players, if a player could make widespread appearances, even if they did, the organization was very interested in them holding out for the big bucks,
So
big donors.
yeah, so the long and short of it, and I don't know the details of the contract, but if the club does it, okay, the player's not getting compensated for that. That's the issue.
Oh, okay.
So that's why in the past we've always been encouraged to go directly to the player's agent, because we would then have to negotiate some sort of compensation for them. But if the club is making the request, the players are obligated to make some certain number of appearances each year on behalf of the club, but they're not compensated. That's part of their salary. So the union wants as few of those as possible. So that's where it kind of gets sticky.
Yeah.
Now, the current thing is that we're still going to the Orioles to let them know, because they don't want to be blindsided that, you know, a player is going to be at the Babe Ruth Museum 2 hours before a game. But how the ask is made is more delicate these days. And that's exactly the same with the NFL. That is exactly, it's now gotten even crazier with the NCAA now allowing college players to be paid more. I'm really nervous that we're going to see a real hike now in those price demands. So it's just not, it's not like the old days where you could just ask somebody to come on by and join you. It's a whole new set of rules.
Is there a difference between the stars of a team in the number of appearances that have to go through the organization, or is it a standard number for each player?
I don't know the answer to that. If it's done like anything else in the contract, I'm sure that they can negotiate. But I don't know the answer to that, honestly. What I do know is that most of these players today have an agent when they're coming out of high school. So somebody is now representing them at all levels. They're not getting to AAA and then deciding they need an agent. Somebody is representing them at every level. And unfortunately, again, and we've seen this many times in the public media, these kids have been told they're special since they started high school. And it's not until after their careers are over, whether it's in single A, triple A, the majors, that they suddenly realize or they learn they're not as special as they've been told they are. But a lot of these, you know, phenomenal athletes have been told right through high school on that they're special, and they some of them start to think they are. It can be real challenging. Again, it comes back to the values, I think, of each and every individual. You know, Trey Mancini was great. We got Trey Mancini because his grandmother and grandfather lived in Bowie. He lived with them when he played for Bowie, and they came to the museum one day and they said, Trey would love this. We're going to make sure he comes here. And he did, because his grandmother and grandfather told him to. And that's sometimes the best way that we make connections with these folks.
Shawn, I love that you said when you talked about the compensation for the college players that you inserted the word more, that they're now going to be paid more than.
Well, you know, my first career was in college services. So I was a counselor at the college level. And, you know, when we're talking D1 schools and the kind of scholarships that they're throwing around, and some of the schools found very sneaky ways to bypass the NCAA rules and still compensate players. You know, I have mixed feelings about it. I prefer D3 schools where the students, you know, they're not big scholarships, and, you know, they're not treated like rock stars because they can play basketball or hockey or lacrosse or baseball. You know, I feel real strongly that a college student needs to finish his 4 years or her 4 years um, academically, but I'm a historian, not a coach.
That's very good. That's very good.
Well, I didn't see anybody fall asleep, so that's a good sign. I'm pretty good. If you want to, if you're have problems with insomnia, I could do this again at midnight and put people to sleep. But,
I like to fun. No,
yeah.
Shawn, could you talk a little bit about about Shawn as a fan of the game? When did you first get an interest in baseball? What allowed you to be, in this position of a fantastic organization?
Sorry, somebody muted me there, so I was like, and that's the rest of my story. You all are not going to like my story. So I was not a huge sports fan, and certainly not a huge baseball fan growing up. My grandfather was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and even when they moved to LA, he continued to refer to them as the Brooklyn Dodgers. But long story short, I started my career. I'm from an Indian reservation in northern New York and southern Canada. So lacrosse in the warm weather and hockey in the cold weather, or downhill skiing. And my family were the downhill skiers, so that's what we did. I went to college, small school in northern New York called Potsdam College. My community, if you drew a triangle from Ottawa, the capital of Canada, to Montreal, to Lake Placid, where they held the 1980 Winter Olympics, I'd be right in the middle. I'm about an hour and 10 minutes from all three of those. I joke with everyone that, I grew up in the days before cable television. So we had two channels out of Canada and we had two channels out of the States. And until I was 8 years old, I thought we had a president and a prime minister, because we watched the news, and depending on which TV channel we were, President Carter was somewhere and Prime Minister Trudeau was somewhere else. But I got my undergrad at Potsdam College in history and political science. I was a double major. And then I went to work at Cornell University as a counselor. And I spent a few years at Cornell before I decided to go back and get my graduate degree. And I tell everyone that I was Lisa Simpson as a kid. My father was an auto worker. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And because we were close to Ottawa and because we were close to Montreal, Dad took us to museums. He didn't take us to a lot of amusement parks or things like that. He took us to museums. And I was Lisa Simpson. I was the kid, in a blue collar family that loved going to museums and reading books. And, I was a first class nerd, and went to the University of Delaware as an American history and museum studies major. And now I'm a certified nerd because I'm certified in museum work. But to be certified in museum studies, you had to do field work like student teaching. And I did mine at the B&O Railroad Museum. And by the way, when I came down here, I thought it was the hottest place on earth. It was so hot. I had a Ford Ranger pickup truck with no air conditioning. And I just thought the summers here were just brutal. But I was at the B&O Railroad Museum for summer. And then I went and did another program at the Smithsonian. And when I graduated, before then, I'm in Delaware. Oriole Park is brand new. I'm doing field work in Baltimore. I'm going back to Delaware each weekend. And all my classmates are like, "You're in Baltimore? Have you been to Oriole Park?" I'm like, "No, I have not been to Oriole Park." "Have you been to Oriole Park? Have you been to Camden Yards?" The B&O Railroad Museum did a volunteer appreciation night. And you could go to a game at Oriole Park. This was 1995. Get a hot dog, a ticket, and a soda for like $8. And I said, "Fine, I'll go." I wanted to be able to say, "Yes, I have been to Oriole Park." I went and was completely mesmerized. I had somebody there who was explaining what was going on, and I found this the most fascinating game. I called it field chess, because if you understood the strategy and if you understood the shift and you were understanding all these things, I went to 15 more games that summer. And I think I went to something like 20 or 25 the following summer. worked at the B&O Railroad Museum, and then was invited to join one of the board committees at the Babe Ruth Museum as an advisor on the collections committee. And when I got there, Mike Gibbons at the time, who I did not like, kept saying, "What's it going to take to get you on my staff?" And I thought, there's no way in hell I'm coming to work for you. 2004, he finally convinced me. I thought I'll do it for 1 year, and then I was going to head back north to a cooler climate where I could ski more. Yeah, it's 2021, and I'm now the CEO of the foundation. So I've learned a lot along the way. I will tell you that I enjoy minor league baseball more than I do going to an Orioles or Nationals game. No disrespect to either one of those organizations, but when I feel like I'm there, I feel like I'm working. Whereas if I go to a game in Aberdeen or I go to a game in Bowie, I actually get to sit down and enjoy the game. And that's what I love. I love minor league stuff the best.
Very good. Thank you. That's very nice.
I will tell you a cute story. So after I fell in love, I had to go to every game anywhere I could go. So I'd go back up. I'd see the Expos play. I went to an Expos game one night at Olympic Stadium, and the place was packed. And this was in one of the last games. And I thought, what are they complaining about? What's Major League Baseball complaining about? They've got a huge crowd here tonight. And the next day on the news, Canadian news at my parents' house, it said, 35,000 people packed Olympic Stadium, A, to see the Expos, B, to see the Mets, C, for $1 hot dog night. And then all the footage was people carrying these styrofoam containers of hot dogs. It was $1 hot dog night. And that's why they drew a big crowd. And then my other cute story is when Ottawa was our AAA club for that brief period. Again, I lived up there, so I went and visited my folks and went to Ottawa to watch a game. And I bought this really cool Ottawa Lynx cap. And if you remember the Lynx logo, it was two cats' eyes and a baseball with a cat's claw digging into the ball. Coolest logo. I loved it. I bought one. I wore it to the warehouse at Camden Yards, and one of the employees said, "That's pretty cool. Who is it?" Like, yep, it's your AAA farm team. Not going to be your farm team for long. And they weren't. So still love the logo. The team's gone, but love the logo.
And I don't think there's any professional baseball in the entire province of Quebec right now.
No, and and it was unfortunate because Montreal, it's a hard. Montreal did love the Expos, but the ownership gave them the shaft, and then MLB gave them the shaft, and once you're told you're going to lose your team, and that's what Montreal kept being told, is that you're going to lose your team, or you're not worthy of a team, or we're going to split it between here and Puerto Rico, and people just kind of said, well, if you don't like us, we don't like you. And it just kind of fell apart. So, and the same thing, their big year was the year of the strike, and what might have been. So when the Nationals won a couple years ago, all my friends on Facebook that night, we were watching the last game, and all my friends were sending out messages. Where's your Expos stuff? Where's your Expos stuff? And we all went and found our Expos stuff. And put it on for those last. We held our breath because we'd been disappointed so many times as Expos fans. We held it out to like the last 2 innings before people started putting their Expos stuff on, because we were afraid to believe that we were actually going to win it.
There's a very strong SABR chapter in Montreal,
and they've done some great stuff. I've purchased a bunch of their stuff over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, they hold out. They hold out hope.
They deserved better, but I will also tell you, I'm from up there, and when it snows in May, and I've seen it snow in June before, you got to be some pretty hardy fans to turn out. There's not a lot of sports that happen outdoors that are not winter Olympic sports. Even hockey is played indoors mostly because it's too damn cold a good part of the year. And if that, the mosquitoes will carry you away because they're the size of pigeons.
That's true. So do you think it's colder than Toronto?
I do. I think it's different.
Because of the lake.
Because of the lake. So up north, and anything north of the Great Lakes, they get the blast from the Canadian Shield. So, month of January and February up there, I mean, I remember a whole month where it was like -18, -20 degrees below zero. And nobody thought twice about it. You still went to school the next day. You lined up your car. You lined up your car so that they could be jump started if they didn't start. You took the batteries out of the car at night and you brought those indoors. You had heaters installed so that the antifreeze and oil didn't become sludge. But you went on your way. But I tell my folks, they don't go outside in January and February, and I don't go outside in July and August here. Too darn hot here. At least when I'm up there, I can put a coat on. And my Canadian accent just came out there too, didn't it? You heard that a little bit. It sneaks out every now and again.
Anybody else questions for Shawn? Babe
I
Ruth
had-
related, museum related.
I had one.
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. I was wondering what role, if any, does Babe's descendants have with the museum?
So Babe's family, the two daughters were both adopted, and they had a real serious parting of ways. And
Yeah.
so we've always had, which is also the case actually with the Unitas family. And that made news years ago between Johnny Unitas Jr. and John's widow, Sandy Unitas. Same thing happened with the Ruth family. So it's a delicate road
Right.
that we walk, but they're still involved. When Julia passed away 2 years ago, she was the last living person with memory of Babe Ruth. So the grandchildren never met him, never knew him. And so it's interesting now that we're seeing the transition to the next generation, the great grandchildren, and they're actually coming to us to learn more about their great grandfather. They're still involved, mostly involved on Julia's side. Although on the other side, there's a couple of them who touch base with us from time to time, see what's going on, or if there's anything new. When Babe was the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom 3 years ago, both sides of the family were represented at the White House, and I had the honor of attending that ceremony at the White House as well, at the request of the family. And I was happy to see both sides, the people who were present from both sides of the family had seemed to kind of buried the hatchet and kind of acknowledged that the feud was between the two sisters. It didn't have to be through the rest of them. So I think there's much more conversation going on between them, but they stay in touch.
That's good to hear. Just another thing, my dad actually spent a month with Babe Ruth in 1941.
Okay.
And he had met him before at the Ray Doan's All-American Baseball School. And it was in Palatka, Florida then. And so Babe Ruth was certainly his idol throughout his baseball career. And he was actually kind of an assistant to the Babe. So he would come and in Palatka, and everyone would come for maybe 10 minutes. Babe Ruth would actually have a hitting exhibition, I guess. And someone who was on a volunteer actually looked at the picture that I have, and he said, well, that picture of your father and grandfather and Babe Ruth, he's wearing the uniform that he wore in Japan.
So
I didn't know that. So he could still fit in it in 1941, which I think was interesting.
Well, it wasn't all that long. I mean, only 5 years had passed.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Babe got so angry at the Japanese. He loved the Japanese up until the attack on Pearl Harbor, and he took all of this stuff from that tour of Japan and was throwing it out the window of their New York apartment. And his wife Claire was running around trying to hide stuff from him, and sent the two daughters down in the street to retrieve what didn't get busted and thrown out. And we have his happy coat, his kimono from that trip that That was one of the items that Julia had retrieved from the street. And then he took his anger and frustration and turned it into war bond rallies. He and Walter Johnson, and I'm sure people on this call know this story better than I do, but he and Walter Johnson would do appearances for war bonds. And Walter would eventually give him a pitch that Babe Ruth could hit a home run with. And, you know, Walter Johnson's fans kept saying to him, why did you give him such an easy pitch? And he said, we're here to raise money. You know, these people came to see Babe Ruth hit a home run. They didn't come here to see me strike him out. And they did that all over the country. Yeah. Another great player, Walter Johnson. I'm sure, I hope the lessons that he learned from Babe were all baseball related, not some of his off-field lessons.
No. But you know, he could still hit at that time. He hit him out of the park then. But yeah, the writer Bob Considine actually went down to spend some time with Babe. I don't know if you've seen that article. Yeah. But so the boys he'd be sitting out, you know, because he only had 10 minutes to go and do his exhibition, and he did some hitting instruction, but the boys would walk by because they had maybe 2 miles to walk from where they were staying to the field. And he would take a car or whatever. And he said, he kind of emphasized that they needed to walk and get their legs stronger. So too bad, but he would make comments to them. And Constantine, this was amazing. The quote was from the Babe to my dad, Bill. He said, and you beamed all over when you were talking about a kid named Bill Enos of Massachusetts. You said he handles himself like chameleon, that someday he'd be up there. Well, he never made it up to the majors, but he had a long career in baseball, over 8 decades. So he learned a lot from the Babe by seeing him.
You know, and I've heard so many stories like that. My old neighbor has since passed away, but he met Babe Ruth on an airplane one day. And of course, the airplanes, you know, were pretty new still then. And he went up to him, and he was a kid coming back from the war in Italy. And I don't know where the encounter took place, but he saw him on a plane, and he said, Babe, I just wanted to say hello to you. He said, I went to Mount St. Joe. And Bill's story was, Babe said to Claire, get up, let this kid sit down. And when my neighbor sat down, again, he's just a kid, you know, early 20s. Babe was asking him all kinds of questions. Is brother so-and-so still there? Did you play ball? And he was just more interested in about what was going on at Mount St. Joe than anything. But I've heard so many of those stories. I've never really encountered anyone who had a bad interaction. Maybe the Chicago Cubs during the World Series, but not too many people who have had a bad interaction with the Babe.
One funny story. My dad's father, a plumber, he was about 5'10", maybe, but a little guy. And he went down to visit him in Palatka. And, you know, I guess it's the azalea capital. It's a beautiful place. And so Mrs. Ruth was behind the backstop. My grandfather's name was Abraham. He went by Abe. And he was wrestling with the Babe on the like near home plate. And Mrs. Ruth said, now, Abe, you got to be careful with the Babe. Be careful. And they were wrestling. You can imagine that. So that's, you know, I can't envision that.
You know, it doesn't surprise me at all the stories that I've heard. You know, Golf Magazine actually credits Babe for inventing spectator golf. You know, in the 1920s, 1930s, golf was a game you played. It was not a game you went and watched. And after Babe retires from baseball, he plays golf every day. And the sports writers that had followed him in baseball are now following him when he goes to play golf. And they're writing about it. And crowds start to show up. People wanted to see the Babe play golf. And tournaments started to be organized. And you can Google it. There's a couple of great stories out there. Yeah, he played against Cobb in golf. and I did a whole bunch of celebrity appearances to try to raise money for different organizations. And sometimes they got quite unruly because there was no crowd rules yet. And so the crowds would kind of start moving in, and then they couldn't play anymore because, they had to get people out of the way. It was rumored that he would play, and I don't know enough about golf, so my golfers here, tell me if this is good or bad. He would normally play in the mid to high 80s, but he was known to break into the 70s every now and again. I understand that's a pretty good score. What they said is that he just couldn't putt. And the joke among the family was that, Babe just couldn't help himself not take a swing at a white ball. So putting was the one thing that wasn't his specialty. So I don't know if that's true, but it sounds like it's a good story. I have to tell you, for some reason on my Zoom screen, everybody moved around like musical chairs. So I'm looking where I was looking for certain people before. You're all in different places. So musical Zoom, I guess.
Social distancing. What has been your most memorable experience as a director?
Well, my two most memorable, I'll give you two.
Sure.
Were not as director, but as chief curator. And one is a really good one, and one is a not so good one. And I don't tell this very often, but I will, because of we're in special company here. Meeting Yogi Berra was probably one of the highlights of my career. Although I will tell you that when you we're on a tour with Yogi, after a year or an hour, your head was definitely spinning, because all the stories about how Yogi spoke is exactly how he spoke.
What do you mean?
He just would talk in circles. He was the one that was quoted that, you come to the fork in the road, take it, and you're like, what does that mean? But he did that all the time. And I would add, right in that same category, Brooks Robinson is certainly, as you all know, is first class. Boog Powell. I love watching Boog Powell try to irritate Jim Palmer, because it's easy to do. So those have been some of the best experiences. The worst experience I've had, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I will anyway. We borrowed a baseball bat from Bob Feller, Hall of Famer, Cleveland Indians. And that famous picture of Babe Ruth at Yankee Stadium, he's dying of cancer and he's leaning on a baseball bat. Well, that baseball bat was Bob Feller's. And after that, the bat was stolen and took many years, but Feller got it back and he lent it to us for display at Sports Legends. And then he agreed to come out and do a program for us. Some of you might have been there. Feller was not a very nice person. He was pretty nasty. And I remember at one point, this young man, he was 14 at the time, roughly looked like he was about 14 at the time. He asked Bob Feller a question that Feller didn't like. And he just ripped into this poor kid, and told him, that he needed to join the army and that he needed to get a haircut and he was never going to do anything with himself. The kid was about 14. We all knew it. And we had to be restraining the dad out in the hallway who wanted to beat the snot out of Bob Feller for what he'd just done to his boy. So, unfortunately, they're all people with good qualities and some not so good qualities. One of the most fun things I ever did, we hosted 3 women from the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League that had played in 1952 for the Fort Wayne Daisies. And that was the year Jimmy Fox managed the Fort Wayne Daisies. And that's why we had him in to talk about, playing for Jimmy Fox. And 2 minutes with these women, you knew they were baseball players. And my golly, they were a lot of fun. They were with us for, I think, 2 days, maybe 3 days of programming. The final day of programming, they wanted to go out and they were in Maryland, so they wanted to have crabs. So we took them down to one of the places in Canton. The name is escaping me right now. And we couldn't get a table. So I went back to the person at the front and I said, "Do you ever see a movie, A League of Their Own?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And I said, "Well, I've got 3 of the original ball players here. You got to find me a table." "All right, we'll get something." And they did. They got us a table. There was probably 10 of us total. And then I started to notice staffers peeking their heads out from the kitchen, people coming around the corner and kind of looking. Word was going through the restaurant. Bo Brooks, it was Bo Brooks' restaurant, that these 3 women were there. And 3 of the servers came out. They couldn't have been more than 20. And they had crab mallets and T-shirts they wanted to present to these women because they were big fans of the movie. And then they said, "Would you do the song?" And I thought, well, the song is from the movie. The song. They stood up and started singing the song right in the center of the restaurant. And the whole restaurant went silent. And as soon as they finished, everybody stood up and they got a standing ovation. And then we were there probably another hour while they signed autographs. People figured out pretty quickly who they were. That was probably one of the most fun experiences I've ever had.
Anybody else?
I was just wondering about the whole Feller incident, Shawn. I was wondering, did the kid ask Feller a really innocent question, like what kind of question did he ask him? Kind of like really simple, or?
Yeah, it was something, but Feller felt that the kid wasn't showing him enough respect.
I see.
And I don't know if it was the way he asked it, but it certainly didn't warrant the reaction that he got. And unfortunately, I've had a bunch of those. We've had a bunch of experiences, especially also with younger players, those ones that I've told you who were told right from the beginning they were special. I mean, I've had players from Bowie come in and think that they were Hall of Famers and, were the cat's meow. Years ago when we had Sports Legends and the Buck Showalter would bring all of his first year players in. Didn't mean that they were first year in the majors, but if it was their first year playing for the Orioles, they had to come to Sports Legends for an orientation and learn something about Orioles history. This is a cute story. During the presentation, Bill Stetka would then say at the 9th inning of the exhibit, he'd say, "This is the current team. And so if something happens during the season, I'm going to come to you and ask for something to put on display. So that if I come to you, I want you to know this is where it's going to be put. This is the 9th inning. It's the current Orioles." And Chris Davis was first year then, and he turned around. Everybody's in sports coats. Buck required them to be dressed. They were all in sports coats. Chris Davis turned around and said, "Listen here, bitches, I'm going to be the first one in here." And they all, hooted, hollered, and, gave each other a lot of grief. But that was the season. About a month later, when Orioles are playing the Red Sox and we'd blown through the bullpen, Red Sox had blown through their bullpen. I think we went something like 17 innings. And Buck puts Davis on the mound. And Chris Davis is the winning pitcher. The next day they're in Baltimore. Davis comes to the museum with his cleats and puts them down on the admissions counter and says, "Told you I was going to be the first one in here." Well, I'm on the phone to Bill Stetka going, I got Chris Davis handing me his shoes. And he said, "I'll be right there." He came over. We had to recreate it about 2 hours later when they had TV cameras there of Chris Davis putting his shoes from that game on display at the museum. So he was a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun too. Ravens used to do the same thing. The Ravens would bring all of their rookies in. They would have a dinner for them at the museum, but they would have Lenny Moore. They'd have Al Bumbry. They would have Cadre Ishmael and one of the Negro League players as their guest speakers. And Lenny Moore would look at all of these rookies and say, "You have not earned the right to say you play for Baltimore. You have not earned your position yet. And they would all be sitting there going, yes, Mr. Moore, whatever, Hall of Fame football player, Mr. Moore, whatever you say, Mr. Moore. And they needed to hear that. And he was probably one of the only people in that position that could say that to them. You know, coaches can say it and go in one ear and out the other. But when you have a Hall of Famer who's got his ring right there saying, you haven't earned the right to call yourself a Baltimorean yet, I think it goes a long way. And I wish all the teams did a little bit more of that. That's what you get when you have, you know, senior players who've been around for a while, to kind of keep those clubhouses in check.
Guys, any more questions for Shawn before we let him retire for the evening? Because it looks like he's at home. We do thank him for spending time with us, giving us insight into how the Babe Ruth Museum and some of his fellow museums have survived thus far through COVID and dealing with the changing climate of technology and what is coming in the future. Next year, obviously, the museum, since we're a little less than a year away from SABR 50, assuming everything goes according to plan, and we're on course, the museum will have a big role in not only probably sitting on panels and being part of the presentations, but you know, they'll probably have a table and have, you know, staff and stuff will be there in the for those of you who've been to the national conventions, in the vendor room. And obviously they will host SABR convention attendees, you know, to stop over during the 4 or 5 days when you're in Baltimore. So, because I know not everybody on this call is local. So unless Bruce has anything to add, Shawn?
The only thing I would like to add to that is to implore everyone to think about staying local when you can. And what I mean by that is, you know, if we're carrying the next favorite baseball book, consider buying it from us rather than Amazon, or, you know, supporting the local teams or supporting the local museums, because all of us, especially those of us in the nonprofit side, are trying to figure out, you know, I count every day now how many people have come through the museum and how many t-shirts they may or may not have purchased. It's our lifeline right now.
What about those of us who aren't local though?
Well, but what I'm saying is that there are local museums where you are. There's local organizations where you are, whether that is a little league that's doing a fundraiser, or a boys and girls club that's doing a fundraiser, or a police athletic league, or any of those things. You know, consider helping them out, because I think, you know, all of us are going to struggle this year. It's going to be a little harder this year coming. But if you can support local, please do so. And those that are in Baltimore, the History Alliance just finalized today. We've done this in the past, that if you buy, I think it's a membership over the $100 level, you get a pass for 2 to all the other museums. So if you buy a membership at the Babe Ruth Museum at the $100 level or higher, I think it's a $100 level. Katie is the one that negotiated that today. It gets you a pass to the B&O Railroad Museum. It gets you a pass to the Baltimore Museum of Industry, the Star Spangled Banner Flag House. So it's a great perk. Our membership also does an exchange with the zoo. So if you're a member at any level at the Babe Ruth Museum, I think this year it's going to be September and October, your membership is honored at the zoo, and the zoo's members are honored at the Babe Ruth Museum. It's just an added incentive that if you're not sure you want to come downtown, we're going to try to do our best to give you a reason to come downtown. So get a hot dog at Pickles Pub and, you know, a soda, and come see the museum. It'll help all of us out a little bit.
I know this is probably a bad time to even talk about this, but I don't remember if you said, I don't recall what you said. Do you have any kind of speaker series going on at the museum now?
Yeah, so we're working on overhauling that, because now it all has to be virtual. And when we did Birthday Bash this year, we did a session with Brooks Robinson, Boog Powell, Jim Palmer, and John Miller. John Miller was the moderator in California. Jim Palmer was in Florida, and Boog and Brooks were local. And it allowed us to do something we couldn't do before. The challenge with that is we had to go around or have somebody go around to each one of them and set them up, because Brooks had no idea what a Zoom was. And at one point, I think John Miller had the camera aimed the opposite direction. So we've had some challenges with that we're still trying to work through with some folks. We are trying to do a program right now with Blackjack, name just escaped me, Fisher, Orioles pitcher, and he threw Roger Maris's 60th home run pitch. He lives in Maryland, actually. So we're trying to do something with him to talk about, throwing that pitch to Roger Maris. I think virtual is allowing us to do more of that. So we're working on it for sure. I'm also interested in what you guys are doing. And I've said this before, I would love to set up a monthly or every other month book club session with SABR, where we kind of, read a certain book and then get the author of that book to come on in and talk about it. We've done that with Jane Levy, but we could certainly do it with a whole bunch of other people. And that might be fun. Of course, it'll be like other book clubs. People will skim it the last night before, try to act like they read the book. But nonetheless, I think if we have the right moderator and a good author, we can have a pretty fun discussion.
We still do Cliff Notes.
Right. I still think they come out.
Shawn, I will talk with you about that more. I think that's a great idea, and we'll do something to help that happen.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to sell you the book, or you can get it on Amazon.
No, I think that's a great idea. We should.
If we could figure out a way, especially if the author is either self-published or has a certain number of them, we've done that a lot with authors, where we'll get a number of the books, they'll sign it, they'll autograph the book too, and that's one thing that I can get done that Amazon can't.
Very good. No,
speaking of which, guys, the Baltimore baseball book, which is 80 plus articles on every ballpark, professional ballpark in Baltimore history, and articles on all the significant games going back to the 1880s, many of which were written by Baltimore Babe Ruth chapter members. That should, as soon as the cover is finalized, should be out this fall. Obviously, as SABR members, you'll be able to get the PDF version for free, but we encourage you to buy it. And if you're local, the museum will likely carry it, so you can pick it up there. And that will come out in advance. According to Bill Nowlin, it should be out probably in November, so it'll be in advance of the holiday season. So consider getting it for all of your baseball family and friends.
Good idea.
And for those of you who haven't met Shawn in person, obviously next time you're at the museum, ask for him and introduce yourself. He knows Bruce and I far too well. I'm not only a friend and colleague, I'm also an employee, so I have to behave myself here. But he's done a lot, not just for the museum, but for the Baltimore community, and taking up for Mike Gibbons, who was there for 35-ish years as the director, I'm sure is a daunting challenge. And I can tell you from a personal standpoint,
he's still there.
He's still there on a limited basis. But a lot of things have become modernized over the past couple of years, and archiving old interviews and doing this and doing that, and kind of cleaning out the closets to make history more available to the general public over time.
Yeah, that's the goal. There's no reason to keep closets that nobody can see and nobody can access. We got to find ways to get this stuff out there. And we've got to find ways, I think, to entice and lure younger people to get involved and have the same passion that we do. And, I feel pretty strongly about the virtual studio, the virtual classroom. It's technology that I'm not comfortable with, but I got to find people who are comfortable with it, so that we don't become a relic. We're not a dinosaur.
And if anything, any indication with, you guys probably know this, SABR's membership has exploded nationally since COVID started and has gone up significantly over the last year, probably because baseball fans have been locked away and needed an outlet. So we're hoping that that translates into enthusiasm for places like the Babe Ruth Birthplace and other baseball related entities around the country.
As long as SABR keeps emphasizing Zoom, I think it will, Peter.
Yep. We're going to do, I can tell you from the Baltimore Babe Ruth chapter, Bruce, we will still do hybrid meetings even when we go back to having some in-person ones. So get in the back of your mind that there will always be some sort of virtual, because obviously I know, Ryan, you're in Indiana or Kentucky, one of those.
Indiana. Yeah.
Indiana. So, I mean, and Francis is down in North Carolina, so we're all over the place. I'm about a mile from Camden Yards, but other than that, everybody's spread out.
Well, Bruce and Peter, I'm going to challenge you guys again. There should be a SABR rack card Babe Ruth chapter available at the Babe Ruth Museum for anybody who comes through. I think we could sign up a whole bunch of people for the chapter, because we've got a captive audience. If they're already there, they'll take a rack card on their way out the door. So
we actually have a plan in place that I haven't told you about yet, but it involves one of your employees.
Okay, good. I have so many of them. I can only imagine who it is.
Yeah, you probably have.
All right.
All right, guys. Well, much appreciated. Don't forget, 2 weeks from today, the Called Shot lunch on the 18th. And Bruce and I will actually be at the museum that day. We have an author, Lawson, forgetting his first name right now, who wrote a book called Clubby, about his experiences when he was the in-house club manager for the Aberdeen Ironbirds. For
Greg Lawson, I think.
Greg, yes. Back in 2012 and 13, or 13 and 14, somewhere in there. He spoke at a Bob David's chapter annual meeting a couple years ago before COVID. So he will be joining us live from Texas. And we still have November and December to book up. So if you know any authors or speakers, just reach out to me, and then we'll be starting some of our in-person stuff by the end of January. So.
Peter, you never showed us your man cave there, but I also have a question about of Jeff. Is that Forbes Field behind you, or what is that?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
what's that thing over there to the, well, on the right side of our screen? I mean, as you go down away from the scoreboard, is that a house? What is that? I mean,
Well, it's the left field wall. The left field wall of Forbes Field.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah, Ivy on there.
Isn't that going though from the scoreboard towards center field?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure where you see a house.
It's like a white object or something.
Oh, well, at the bottom of it,
Figure that
looks like
out.
there's a light. Looks like there's a light stand there. I see what you're asking about. But I'm not sure what was out in center field. Maybe it's where they keep the batting cage and stuff like that. Maybe.
Yeah, that was throwing me. I thought it looked like Forbes Field, but then I thought,
Yeah, it's Forbes Field, but the main object, the player there. You know who that is?
No.
Can you see the number on the? Can you see the number?
65, 60.
I always say that's close to his real age.
Satchel.
Yeah, Satchel Paige. When the Braves signed him in '68, so he could qualify for his pension. I was actually there, and I was on a family vacation, and we were sitting down by the Pirate dugout, and I looked up and saw Satchel Paige warming up, and I had to run down to the bullpen to get this picture.
Huh. That's right. That was good. So you took that picture.
I took it. I didn't just get it off the internet.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's my little brownie camera.
Huh. Yeah.
Well, you should put it up on the internet so people can have it.
Well, I did post it on Facebook a couple of years ago with like 2 other pictures from that game. I had one of Hank Aaron and Joe Torre.
Okay.
Anybody that's a Facebook friend can see it on my Facebook page. Just look at my photos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
All right, very good.
All right, guys. Well, any other questions? You know how to reach me. If not, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Obviously, thank you, Shawn.
Signing off.
And we'll see you everybody again soon. Have a great week, everybody.
Okay.
Hey, you too.
Yes, thank you.